welcome to Monster Men.
Hey everybody, we got a very special guest today. This is somebody that I picked up his first book and was like blown away, a cryptid freak that I am, and have been following him on his travails, his different books, and his appearances on TV. We have the incomparable Lyle Blackburn with us today, coming to us all the way from Texas. How you doing, Lyle?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Now, for those of you who don't know Lyle, and if you watch our podcast, I don't know how you don't, he is the author and cryptid researcher from Dallas, Texas. His acclaimed books, The Beast of Boggy Creek, this was a game changer for me with cryptids, and his newest, The Lizard Man. They reflect his lifelong fascination with legends and sighting reports of real-life monsters. During his research, Lyle has often explored the remote reaches of the southern U.S. in search of shadowy creatures said to inhabit the dense backwoods and swamplands of these areas. Lyle is also staff writer and cryptozoology advisor to RUE MORGUE magazine, which is one of my favorite magazines because they reviewed one of my books. It's one of the leading horror media publications in print today. He's a featured speaker at paranormal and horror conferences across North America and has appeared on television shows such as Finding Bigfoot, Monsters and Mysteries in America, and the CBS Sunday Morning Show. Welcome, Lyle.
Hey, thanks, man.
That's some resume, very short time.
It's hard to, I'm a writer, and I have trouble writing my own bio because it's just sort of so much stuff. And in fact, I've left a little bit out on that whole thing. So I try to keep it concise, but it's very confusing because I've done so much stuff. So
yeah, where do we see this bio a year from now?
Well, it's interesting because if you Google you or look you up on YouTube, that's all the bio you need, because there's clips from TV shows, there's lectures, there's other podcasts that you're on, and it's all great stuff. So I guess, there's a lot of places that we want to go here today, but I just finished the Lizard Man book. It was actually the first book I read on my Kindle.
Hey, cool.
And I really enjoyed it. And so I wanted to start with that because Hunter had reviewed the book on his blog, and so I read it. And as I'm reading it, it's hard to keep all of these cryptozoology and urban legends straight. And I'm reading the book, and especially when I got to the part where the car gets chewed, and we can get into this in more detail later, but I'm going, I feel like I've seen this on Fact or Faked, and then in the book you refer to it, that yes, this was, and I'm like, oh, this is the thing where the guy dressed up in the lizard costume, and I was like doing backflips. I'm like, oh my god, so I did not realize just how much there was to this story. So I thought, let's start with the Lizard Man. We'll get to Boggy Creek later, but personally, I got to just say before I let you talk for a second, Hunter and I have gone to different haunted spots. There's a cemetery here in Connecticut that's really famous we went to, and you're living our dream, because that's what we want to do. We want to find local legends and then go talk to people and investigate them. So we're so excited to talk to somebody who's actually done this and hear what the hell goes on behind the scenes and everything. So let's talk Lizard Man. Give us a quick, who is the Lizard Man, and how the heck did you get involved with him?
Well, like you say, it's one of those things that has been covered on several TV shows. It just keeps coming up, and it's mentioned a lot in various cryptozoology books. But a lot of times you just get the high points, the synopsis of it, and so forth. And there was more to the story. But the genesis for writing that book came after I'd written The Beast of Boggy Creek, which was about a southern Bigfoot type creature. I was looking for, something else to write about. So I had this idea that I would kind of stimulate and inspire myself by taking what I called a swamp tour. So I went all across the southeast parts of the U.S. to various swamps, Honey Island, Okefenokee in Georgia, which is a huge swamp. And of course, I visited Skapor Swamp in Bishopville, South Carolina. And I think my intention was that maybe I would write something a little more comprehensive about different swamps or something. But once I got to Bishopville and I had the fortune of visiting with the retired sheriff Liston Truesdale, who was intimately connected with the Lizard Man story, I realized, man, there's so much more to this story. And this guy is also a great character. You know, he's just a small town southern, sheriff and all that. And so it ended up that as I looked at it, I thought, well, this really could make a book, if I include, my process of discovery on the research, because there's a lot of things that are connected, like you mentioned the car damage. I mean, there's just a lot of strange aspects to the whole thing. So that's really how, I started on the process of writing the book. But just to give people an idea, the most significant and sensational sighting associated with the Bishopville Lizard Man occurred in the summer of 1988, in which a young man by the name of Christopher Davis was driving home from work late one night, 2:30 a.m. He's got to pass through an area called Scape-Ore Swamp. And it's very remote, especially back then, swampy areas, a few houses out there that dot the countryside, but, it's a rough and rugged place. Well, unfortunately, he had a flat tire, apparently, and as he had finished changing that up and he's putting the jack and the spare back in his trunk, he saw what he thought was a human-like figure approaching through the fennel grass. There was enough moonlight that he could see, and it kind of spooked him a little bit, but as it got closer, he realized that it didn't seem to be a human. It was quite large, maybe 7 foot tall. He believed it to have greenish skin. It looked somewhat reptilian. It had 3 fingers with long black claws. Of course, at this point, he freaks out. He jumps in his car and tries to get away. This alleged creature jumps on the top, tries to claw its way in as he zooms out down the road. It falls off. It ends up chasing the car, jumping back on it, but he did manage to lose it again and escape. And that sighting was quite popular in the media once it came out, once the sheriff found the story. And so that's how the whole Lizard Man thing got started. And like these other cases, a lot of times once something comes out, some of the old timers or people said, "Oh, no, we've seen this before. This is just the first media case." And so it goes on from there with subsequent sightings and also some historical aspects to reptilian humanoids in the area.
Most of my family is actually, they're down South Carolina, North Carolina, and I was actually in Fort Mill, South Carolina in 1988 in the summer for a while. But somehow, all they care about there was golfing, so I never got to hear about the Lizard Man. But it was in the back of my head, and I thought when I saw the announcement that you were doing a book on the Lizard Man, I was like, wow, that's an interesting cryptid to tackle. There's so many others that are really famous around the world, and I thought this was really fascinating. And one of the aspects I found intriguing was how the inconsistencies in the reports. Each person seemed to experience something different. Even reading, I could tell that you were wondering, is this a lizard man? Is this like a Sasquatch? Was it tough for you trying to build a narrative around so many disparate stories from everybody?
Yeah, it was. It was rather challenging, and at times I thought, man, this is difficult. But the way I approach these, and one reason I chose that story as opposed to retelling something that people have heard over and over and over, is that it ultimately it's a mystery. It's people saying they saw strange creatures. There's a local sheriff involved. There's a small town. There's a swamp. So ultimately, it is what it is, and I don't try to skew the eyewitnesses' descriptions any other way than what they describe. And if they differ, then hey, let's sort this out. Let's just present all the information, because especially in that book, I tried to bring the reader along with me as I was out there trying to sort this stuff out. And let's just figure out, is there a lizard man? Is there more than one? Is it mistaken identity? No matter what it is, it's still a great story. So it was challenging, but still I I just thought it's just a cool concept, and I'm a big fan of Creature from the Black Lagoon, and this almost seemed like at some points that was a modern real life Creature from the Black Lagoon. So it had me hooked.
There was something interesting that happened while I was reading the book. You talk about Chris Davis, and then I naturally go to YouTube, and you can find interviews with him on the news, and suddenly the book is coming to life. I'm like, wow, but you're giving the insight behind it. So you have his story, and you've got some other stories, but then like later on, after like all you've really been presented with is accounts of the lizard man, witnesses. All of a sudden, this other farmer kind of steps up and says it might have been him protecting his shed, and all of a sudden, like this doubt is cast over the story, and it got me thinking of when you talk to people about ghosts or any other kind of paranormal thing. There's like the group of people that really want to believe, and they'll just, as soon as there's a noise, that's a ghost. Oh my God, it's shadow people. And then there's other people that are like, nah, nothing is supernatural at all. But I thought it was interesting that like there was sort of no doubt that there was a monster until all of a sudden some guy says, well, it might have been me. What was going through your head, like as you were going through this, with that evidence, and then do you feel like there was people that just were sort of buying into this because they want the attention, they want to be part of the story?
Well, the reason that one person's account like that doesn't blow it for me is because after so much experience with these small town monsters, in almost every case, I have not one but multiple people that always claim that they are the ones responsible for it. Even in the case of the lizard man, and unfortunately I didn't find out about this claim until just after, but there was another guy who claimed that he was the lizard man, and the facts he gave that were supposed to prove it actually disproved it, because he had to go by there on his way to work. Well, actually I knew where the guy had worked because he had been in a newspaper story, and the whole thing was just wrong. So again, I just include all the story. If a farmer had suspicion thrown on him that he was the lizard man, fine. But how do you explain all these other sightings? Because you would have to orchestrate it. And this came up in the Beast of Boggy Creek. There was people say, "Oh, my cousin's the Falk monster." Well, okay, he's somehow orchestrated hundreds of sightings. The lizard man, there were less sightings, so it was a little more plausible. But there were sightings before that of creepy things walking around in the swamp. For no purpose. I mean, there's no way a farmer was down there walking around the swamp for any other reason.
Right.
A couple of years before that. So to me, it's like I can't just take that at its word. Just like I don't take it at its word that it's a lizard man. I explore and get as much as I can as far as the proof, and then we can make some conclusions from there. But those are just part of the story and part of what makes it intriguing. And you're never going to read that when you pick up Cryptozoology 101 and they talk about the lizard man. You're never going to read all the aspects that I put into my books.
Yeah, I think that's what sets you apart, because when your books, when you read them, I can tell you don't have an agenda. Your agenda is to get the story out there, warts and all. You present all sides of it. And I think it's really cool how you add like pop culture and the influence of those stories on pop culture, and how those pop culture can influence that kind of story. Lizardman, as I'm reading, I'm going, he has to mention the Slee Stack from Land of the Lost sooner or later, and sure enough, you did.
I think those things are important as to why they're appealing. Like I say in the book, is people. I mean, especially the ones that latched on in the media and stuff. It's just something appealing about it, kind of a Creature from the Black Lagoon, type monster. So, it's definitely something that almost, if you've loved it in pop culture, and now here's suddenly somebody reporting that one of these attacked him in real life. That's just cool.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm a creature. The Creature from the Black Lagoon's my favorite Universal monster. Jack, you were with me when I got Julie Adams' autograph a couple of years ago.
That's right.
It's on my wall over here somewhere.
Yeah, I wonder if I can show the rest of my room. I'm going to attempt. I have a huge collection of monster toys, and the Creature is part of it.
That is tremendous.
The Creature's up there. I can't see if it's showing it, but
if you watch episodes of Monster Man, one of our trademarks is our bobblehead doll collection. I think you just put us to shame.
Well, in my house has been featured on HGTV. They did a show called Home Strange Home, and they featured my monster collection in that. I have cryptozoology stuff and, movie monsters and so forth. So it was definitely cool.
That's awesome. I wanted to ask you, when all was said and done, after you interviewed everybody, you'd taken a look at all the reports. I mean, you had a lot of in the book itself, the actual police reports and everything. That was great. When you look at it, do you think this was some sort of reptoid lizard man, or you lean more towards maybe this was just a traditional Bigfoot that kind of went through the town that summer?
I'm not so sure it was a reptoid or reptilian, to be honest. And a lot of people kind of took offense to that because, what about the aliens? What about that? I said, the problem is nobody who had a sighting in that area reported a UFO. There was no association with that in the particular case of the Bishopville lizard man, which is what I'm writing about. Now, there's other alien encounters that they look reptilian and all that, and certainly, I can't say it's not an alien, but, what the heck is it running through Scape Swamp for?
Right.
So I kind of approached it in a cryptozoological way, which is what it's traditionally included in subject-wise. But at the end of the day, I did think that the theory that some of the sightings could have actually been a Bigfoot, wet or covered in algae, held some value to those. And so I think in the case of the lizard man, ultimately, I think, different people saw something different, and they all ended up, being construed together as the tale of the lizard man. So it could have been multiple things that people saw, explaining one cryptid with another, like, oh, it wasn't a lizard man, it was a Bigfoot. Some people are going to go, what? I don't even buy into that. But,
yeah.
I'm just throwing out the possibilities. And so, I'm not saying that every case was a Bigfoot, and certainly not saying that every case, was a reptilian. It may have been something in between or so forth. But, it's just like all these cryptid cases. Ultimately, you just come to the end of the road, and you don't have a smoking gun or an absolute piece of proof. So the story is just never ending, with most of these stories. And
right.
You just sort of chalk it up to being a cool, spooky mystery,
Yeah.
Now, you got to meet the sheriff, so I definitely want to hear about your thoughts about him. I also am curious as to your thoughts on the Chris Davis story. Are you buying it? What do you think of it? But then I want you to parlay that into when you go to a town and introduce yourself to somebody and say, I want to talk to you about the lizard man, or you're talking to people back home and you tell them what you do. What's the reaction that you get to that? So that's a loaded question, but if you could...
Yeah, really. Let's set aside a half an hour for that one.
Well, I mean, when I tell somebody what I do, I write books about, quote unquote, real life monsters. I hunt monsters and things. Everybody that I've ever told that to has said, wow, that's cool. That's so cool. No one has ever once challenged me or just said that's a bunch of nonsense. I don't know. I know people run into that in this business, but nobody's ever said that to my face.
Well, I think Hunter had it right, though. You come off as an investigator who's reporting the facts as you're collecting the evidence and saying, okay, here it is. And there's a couple of points in the book where you basically say, like those tracks, they pretty much came out to be BS, right?
Yeah, that's true, because I can identify with skeptics and quote unquote believers, all at the same time, because I see myself somewhat like half investigative journalist, half cryptozoologist, or whatever that may be. So I'm just there to sort out the truth, whatever that may be. I don't have an agenda, like you said, and I think that probably helps me to identify with the layperson, the person that maybe never heard of this or maybe skeptical. And, I like that, because I do have a crowd that I write to in RUE MORGUE, which is more of the horror movie crowd. And I'm, an expert in all these cryptids. And I do believe in the possibilities that there's living creatures that could be responsible for these sightings. But I certainly can understand all the points of view. And I try to not, assume the reader is either one. Let's just sort it out. So when I tell people what I do, they think it's cool, and I love to talk about this subject. And there's been plenty of times when the guy comes over to service my cable or something, and he starts looking in my house like, whoa, do you own a Halloween store? What is what's the deal with Bigfoot? There's like a bunch of Bigfoot, right? Sooner, 5 minutes later, he's telling me about how his uncle saw some really weird thing while he was hunting somewhere in Texas. So, people, if you just give them a chance, they will tell you, or, some strange things have happened. So,
yeah.
Let's see, what was the rest of that question?
Well, it leads back to, because when you dealt with the sheriff, if you came off as it's like people who like wrestling and they go for a job at WWF or WWE. If they're a crazy wrestling fan, they get turned away at the door. But if they're knowledgeable and professional, they're like, oh yeah. So I would imagine, I wondered what was it like talking to the sheriff? What was he like? Was he open to speaking with you? And he was a fascinating character in the book.
Right. Oh yeah, he was definitely open to it. And I find that in these cases, a lot of people call him. A lot of people are trying to interview him and hunt him down and ask him things. A lot of people just don't follow up. They're not serious about it. But I am. I don't bother them unless I'm, trying to make a serious approach and do an investigation of these things. So I talked to Mr. Truesdale a couple of times on the phone prior to getting there, and told him what I was doing and that I had written another book, and tried to make him feel that I was, approaching the subject seriously. And when you do, and then I finally meet him in person, man, within a few minutes, it doesn't take long before they open up, and he was very willing to talk. I mean, he's done a lot of these TV programs. He's kind of just fascinated by the whole lizard man subject as anybody else is, even though he's so well connected to it. And I think in a way he really wished that there would be a definitive answer, that it could have been solved in some way. And I think he's still, he looks to me like maybe I could bring something to it, and the next person, Right. So he's definitely open to talking about it. So I went to his house many times and hung out, and he took me around. He took me to Skateboard Swamp, and was very accommodating, helped me get a hold of some of the other witnesses that were still living. He was very helpful with the whole thing. And, and again, by the time it's done, I've got a piece in there. I try to tell a little bit about him, because you see his name associated with the Lizard Man story and Christopher Davis and Sheriff Truesdale, but nobody ever really gives you much of a background about what kind of cop this guy was. Where did he come from? That sort of thing. So I think that's important to characterization, to give you a better overall feel of the story, as well as I'm there. I can describe Skateboard Swamp. I'm not on Wikipedia like Skateboard Swamp. I mean, what I'm saying? I was there, and I can take pictures and I can describe it to people, which I think is important to these books. If I went out there and Skateboard Swamp was, right next to Six Flags over Bishopville or whatever, and I'm looking and going, people, this is ridiculous, But when I see a remote and rugged place, and especially one that was like that in 1988, I say, well, it is a place that a large animal can move around. Mm-hmm. So, it gives me a greater perspective to go to the places,
Yeah. Now, I thought that, I don't think I've ever read a book dealing with a cryptid or paranormal that had a person of authority like he was, so invested in it and willing to talk, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, that's one reason I thought the story had a lot of merit, because of that. You have the police involvement. You rarely have that,
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember having somebody that was integral to the investigation talking so much years after. I mean, I thought that was a good get.
I'll tell you, most of the books you see are more like a Wikipedia entry. That just, here's the facts that happened, here's a map. I really enjoyed this book because it was a collection of angles on it, stories, perspectives.
Your pictures.
Yeah, like of the real place. So I felt like, oh, I'm curious about this, and this guy's gone there and asked the questions I want to ask and went to places I would want to go. So I was thrilled with it. Did you encounter anything scary there, or this could lead into the Boggy Creek on your travels? Have you ever encountered something where you're like, oh crap, I'm in trouble? Whether it was a Bigfoot stalking you, or maybe you took a wrong turn in a neighborhood or something.
Yeah, it could be people as much as any.
People might be scarier than the monsters.
Yeah, in some cases, maybe. I'm trying to think of something. I'm somewhat fearless, or maybe careless might be the word. When I'm doing this, I feel like that, I got to really stick myself out there to get the good material for a book. So, I mean, it was kind of spooky going into Skateboard Swamp. It got dark, but I've been in so many swamps. I paddled around at night with 14-foot alligators swimming by the canoe within 1 foot. I mean, these kind of things are kind of normal, so it would really have to be something extraordinary to get me spooked in that way. But there's been some times where when I started researching the Beast of Boggy Creek, which was kind of my first foray into a swamp monster, a gentleman arranged me to go meet some guys, and one of them had a story. So I meet him. He drives me down into the countryside, into this small rural community, down some dirt roads, down by a river, down to a trailer. And inside the trailer is, some dudes, it was like noon. They're all drinking Budweiser. They got the beards, no shirts. The whole thing's going on. And, I come in here. This is the guy who's going to write the Falk Monster book. And I'm just like,
boy.
Thank
Hi, guys.
Yeah. Hey, dudes. Like, I'm a little bit, I grew up hunting with my father and being out in rural areas. So I'm not unfamiliar with that, but in some ways I'm a city boy, I live in huge metropolitan area of Dallas-Fort Worth. So I was suddenly in just a strange place, and I was just expecting these guys to go total like deliverance. So what do you want to know, boy?
You got a pretty mouth, boy.
There ain't no monster down here. Yeah. But as it turned out, they were completely cool and very friendly. And over the course, since I first started researching for the Beast of Boggy Creek years back, I've become friends with all these people down there. I could just show up. Last time I was down there doing some camping and some research on the swamps in southern Arkansas. I ran into a guy in the town. He's like, "Hey, Lyle Blackburn, hey man, tomorrow we're having a crawfish boil up on at my dad's house." So we took a lunch break at a crawfish boil because these people are so awesome. So it was kind of spooky when I first started doing it. The people, but I'm used to that now, and nothing really shocks me. And I guess the alligators are, almost stepped on a cottonmouth water moccasin the other day. So that'd be the scariest things that happen.
That'd be the scariest thing to happen here.
Hunter and I run a panel in New York City a couple of years ago where people were asking us, and me and him have throughout our lives either legally gone to famous haunted places, notorious haunted places or whatever, and more often than not, we've also snuck into some places, especially when we were younger. And there's a place called Danvers State Mental Institution or Hospital that was sort of a notorious spot that if you watch the movie Session 9, it's filmed there. So I used to live up in that area, and I was visiting a friend of mine. We went to a Red Sox game, and on the way home, we decided to sneak up and see the hospital. We're huffing and puffing up the hill and sneaking our way up, and we get to the building, and we look at each other, and we're like, I think I'm more scared of the cops, or if the door is unlocked, who else is in the building? We weren't scared about the ghosts. We were more scared about who else was in the building. And then we decided that the trespassing and the possibility of going to jail wasn't worth the risk. We decided to get the hell out of there.
Yeah, I can see that being the case. But that's a pretty spooky place. I saw that movie, and
it's condos now. They knocked it down.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
There's a place I would not buy a condo.
American.
I'd buy a condo there.
I probably would if I saw on the realtor sign, haunted. I think I'd pay a little extra for that property.
Yeah.
First.
You know what? I see a lot of places now where they used to try to hide that, or promoting the fact that they're haunted.
Yeah.
Thinking they can get some bigger money that way. It's weird how things have changed in the last 10 years, man.
Yeah, well, and it's like that. I think a trend in paranormal in general. The ghost thing is huge. There's so many shows about cryptids and the success of finding Bigfoot on Animal Planet. People are just into it now, and a lot more people come forward and actually are willing to tell you their stories. So it's a good thing in a way, because it's more socially acceptable.
Absolutely.
I
go to Maine every year with my family up west of Portland. And this year, for some reason, it flew under my radar that Loren Coleman has his cryptozoology museum right in Portland.
Oh, yeah.
So I took my daughters, and man, that wasn't easy to find. But I was determined. I was like, we will miss everything else we're going to do today until I find this museum.
Yeah.
And I got there, and there was Loren standing right there, giving you the grand tour, taking pictures with us and everything. And at the time, we started talking and everything. And I said I was writing a book, and this was, I wanted to come there and take a look. He said, so what are you writing? I said, I'm writing a book about the Montauk Monster. It's a thriller. That's not, it's not a real life book, but it's my take on it. And he was like, I'm the guy that coined that phrase, Montauk Monster. I was like, oh, no way.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go back and see him again this year. How did you come to meet Loren? Because he's the godfather of cryptozoology. How did your paths cross?
Well, in a very similar way. When I was writing for RUE MORGUE, initially, they had a section in the magazine called Travelogues, and since I concentrate on cryptozoology themes, I thought, man, how cool would it be if I went to the museum up there and then wrote a travelogue on it for RUE MORGUE. So I decided to sell my wife on the idea that we go to this quaint little fishing town, Portland, Maine, and we could have some seafood and go on the boats, and there's the Cryptozoology Museum we can visit as well.
Right.
She's totally into that stuff, and so we just made a vacation out of it, went up there, and through another friend of mine, he arranged to have Loren meet me, and we actually had dinner with him that evening. So the first time I ever met him, we went to dinner.
Wow.
Got to chatting, and wrote the article, and he was impressed with it, I guess. And from there, we corresponded by email and got to know each other. And we had also seen each other at some events, Bigfoot conferences and things like that. And so we just got to be friends. And obviously, when I wrote the Beast of Boggy Creek, I thought he's the perfect guy to write the intro, because the legend of Boggy Creek was so influential on a lot of today's top cryptozoologists, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Lauren being one of them. So it was a sort of a honor for me to have him write, the foreword for my book. And so we've become good friends. And now I've donated a lot more stuff to the museum up there. And so if you go up there now, you'll see more and more Boggy Creek stuff. In fact, Mysteries at the Museum just did an episode in which they did a Fouke Monster Boggy Creek segment. You know that show?
Yeah.
They did it on this piece of screen that I donated, which came from one of the actual houses that's seen in the Legend of Boggy Creek. I donated that to the museum, and the next thing you know, they're calling me up saying they're doing an episode on it. So,
really cool.
That's wild. So yeah, it's a great place. Everybody that's into cryptozoology should definitely visit.
Oh, I loved it. I wished it was bigger. I said to my daughters, I said, if I win the mega lottery, I said, I'm giving them $1 million to make this thing even bigger.
Oh, it'd be cool.
I'm going there this year. I go to Maine every year too, and I tried to go last year, and I was having trouble finding his phone number on the website. So we got to tell him to make it easier to contact him. But this is a good segue. We did a show a while back called "What Scared You as a Kid," and I've been dying to talk to you about this because you talk about the Legend of Boggy Creek as being this pivotal movie in your life, and little Hunter Shea cited that movie as one of the ones that scared the hell out of him. I guess they claimed to have an actual Bigfoot call or something, a sound in the movie.
Well, the roar of the creature is, it's excellent. It still holds up today. I'm not sure. I'm sure they claimed that was the real call. I'm not sure. At the time, there was a lot of promotions going on in the 70s, but it's effective and it's spooky when it opens up kind of that sort of wildlife educational film, here's some, birds and here's a beaver shot, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And then boom, that roar. I remember seeing that thing in the drive-in. My parents estimate it was 1976. I don't know. must have been really young, but I can remember seeing it. And I was riveted to the screen, and I thought, dude, this is completely real,
Yeah.
It was great. But the thing that really scared me when I was a kid, though, honestly, prior to that, was seeing the Patterson-Gimlin film on TV. Because I loved horror movies, and I grew up, I liked the old black and white ones originally because my father had watched all these at a drive-in and would describe them to me before I ever actually saw Frankenstein or any of that stuff. So I love those old monster movies. But seeing the Patterson-Gimlin creature in that film and thinking, you're telling me this thing is real? That thing was in the woods over there in California. It freaked me right out. And
yeah.
It just scared me. And things like that, real things, ghosts. I'd watch a ghost show, and I wouldn't want to walk down the hall to my room, or whatever.
Now, let me guess. You saw the Patterson-Gimlin film on In Search Of the first time.
It must have been it. I can't. I can remember seeing it on TV, but I don't remember what it was. I'm sure it was In Search Of, I would say.
I remember I was a kid who was dragged to go see The Exorcist and Texas Chainsaw Massacre in movie theaters and stuff. I could go to sleep no problem. And one episode of In Search Of at 7:30 at night, and I was terrified for the rest of the night.
Yep, ditto, dude. That was for me too. The horror movies didn't really scare me, but that stuff did because I thought, man, this is real.
Exactly. I'm not afraid of Leatherface because I know that's some actor, but
yeah.
A ghost or something? Oh my God.
How big of influence? Because my real gateway to Bigfoot was the $6 Million Man. Was that a big event for you when that happened?
Oh yeah. I remember when that was going to air, and I was pleading. I saw that figure in the background. It's awesome. I've got one of the originals.
Oh.
And in fact, I've got a picture of me from. It must have been 1977 or after, but I'm wearing a Star Wars shirt and I'm holding that huge Bigfoot $6 Million Man figure. I'll say yes. But
that's how you fit right in with us, man. You're
there
a monster, man.
Yeah, see, I knew you guys would be right there. So yeah, that was huge. I remember watching all the set, the parts of that, one or two parts or whatever it was, and I was enthralled, and then I, you know, made my parents drive me to Kmart and buy that toy immediately.
Were you a Kolchak the Night Stalker fan?
Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
love that.
You have to,
That's
because
the show that did it.
there are times when I read your books, with both books, where your writing style, I can hear Carl Kolchak's voice in my head while you're writing. It's eerie how you captured that sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, it's totally. And I even mentioned him in the Lizard Man in the book. At some point, I mentioned something about Kolchak.
Yeah, no, I appreciated that.
And you are Kolchak. You're a guy who just, falls in the middle of these things, and you're just trying to get the story.
Yeah. I'm a Kolchak with a different hat, you know.
And luckily, they're not trying to kill you.
Yeah, and I got a better typewriter. I mean, you used to have that. You know, start out with that typewriter, but yeah, it's a great show.
The last episode of The Night Stalker was a lizard man.
Yeah,
that's right. That it was in that the underground base that was going through the tunnels.
It looked like the Gorn from Star Trek.
It probably was the Gorn from Star Trek.
Yeah, revamped, I'm sure, budget wise.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
they were reusing monster costumes from Lost in Space. They said by the second season.
Yeah, that's cool. That's great stuff, man.
So why don't we take a quick turn into Boggy Creek now?
Put on your hip waders.